Rewritten script. When 7 Marines in dress blues changed everything, you're standing at your wife's grave, saying your final goodbye after 43 years of marriage, when suddenly you feel cold steel handcuffs snap around your wrists. Sounds impossible, right? Well, what happened to 70-year-old Sergeant First Class Roland Kemper will absolutely shock you. But the ending? The ending is something you'll never forget. Picture this. Picture this. It's a cold October morning, and Roland Kemper is standing completely still beside a freshly dug grave. The mist is clinging to the headstones like it doesn't want to leave. Oak trees tower overhead, their leaves rustling in the autumn breeze. And Roland, he is wearing the same navy blue suit he wore when they pinned that bronze star on his chest nearly 3 decades ago. Except now it hangs a bit loose on his frame. Time does that to us all, doesn't it? But here's the thing about Roland. Even at 70 years old, even with his body showing the wear of 7 decades, he still stands like a soldier. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes forward. That military discipline never leaves you, does it? On his lapel, there's a tiny American flag pin. Most people wouldn't even notice it, but to those who understand, ... it means everything. The cemetery stretches out across rolling hills, peaceful and quiet except for the distant rumble of traffic from the main road. Rose petals from the funeral service are scattered all around the grave. The headstone is simple, dignified, reading, Margaret Ann Kemper, beloved wife and mother. And Roland has been standing there for over an hour now, just talking to her, whispering memories that only the two of them shared. The kind of intimate moments that make up a lifetime together. Now, let me tell you about Roland's story. Because this man lived a life of service. Straight out of school in 1972, he enlisted. Spent 12 years in uniform before an injury forced him to hang up his boots early. He did 2 tours in different conflicts with his fellow soldiers. They respected him deeply. Why? Because Roland was the kind of leader who never left anyone behind. That bronze star he earned, he got it after carrying 3 wounded men to safety during an ambush. 3 men, while bullets were flying. Think about that for a moment. After the military, Roland didn't just sit around. He spent 30 years in construction, literally building the very communities he'd sworn to protect when he wore that uniform. And in 1981, he married Margaret. They raised 2 kids together, watched them grow up, start their own families, and move away to different states. That's life, isn't it? But Margaret ... Margaret was his rock. She helped him through the nightmares that come with combat. She helped him adjust to civilian life when the uniform came off. And when cancer came knocking 3 years ago, she fought it with the same determination Roland had shown on the battlefield. He was there every step of the way. Every treatment, every doctor's appointment, every terrible day, holding her hand, never complaining, even as the medical bills drained every penny they'd saved. When she passed away last Tuesday, Roland felt like someone had ripped half his soul right out of his chest. Standing at her grave wasn't just about grief for him. No, this was deeper. In the military, you never leave a fallen comrade behind. Never. And Margaret might not have worn a uniform, but she'd been his battle buddy through every fight life threw at them. How could he just walk away and leave her alone in that cold ground? Now, ... Here's where things take a turn you won't believe. Officer Danny Morrison had been on the police force for only 8 months. Young, eager, wanting to prove himself to his superiors. When dispatch reported someone possibly loitering in the cemetery, he jumped on it. The cemetery gates had closed at sunset the night before, so Morrison figured he was dealing with someone who'd hopped the fence. He approached Roland with all the authority of someone who has yet learned when to use it and when to hold back. The old veteran didn't look like the typical people Morrison had dealt with before, but in his mind, rules were rules. When Roland explained he was visiting his wife's grave, Morrison checked his watch. Past official visiting hours, he noted. Trespassing, he determined. Roland tried to explain. He'd been there since the funeral service that morning. He'd simply lost track of time while saying goodbye to his wife of 43 years. Can you imagine? His voice was heavy with fresh grief, the kind of pain that makes your chest physically hurt. But Morrison, he heard excuses, not explanations. The young officer grew impatient when Roland didn't immediately leave. He'd been trained to assert control, to not let civilians dictate how situations unfold. When Roland asked for just 5 more minutes to finish his prayers, Morrison saw defiance instead of desperation. And here's where it escalates beyond belief. Morrison called for backup, claiming he had an uncooperative individual refusing lawful orders. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Roland, overwhelmed by grief and confusion, sat down heavily on a nearby bench. He just needed a moment to gather his strength, to catch his breath. But Morrison interpreted this as active resistance. The backup officers surrounded this elderly veteran, demanding he stand and put his hands behind his back. Roland's military training kicked in automatically. He followed orders, but his body moved slowly because of arthritis and emotional exhaustion. Morrison mistook that slow compliance for continued defiance. And then it happened. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Can you imagine what that felt like? This decorated veteran, this man who'd given 12 years in uniform and 43 years to the woman now in the ground before him, being treated like a common criminal at his wife's graveside. This wasn't the America he'd fought to defend. The cold metal against his skin brought back memories of another time, another place, when he'd been captured during a mission and held for 3 days before rescue arrived. As the officers pushed him toward their patrol car, Roland caught one last glimpse of Margaret's headstone. He remembered her final words to him in that hospital bed. She'd told him he was the strongest man she'd ever known, that he'd always done the right thing even when it was hard. Standing there in handcuffs, it felt like he was failing her memory, failing everything they'd built together. His mind drifted to their wedding day. She'd worn a simple white dress because they couldn't afford anything fancy, but she'd absolutely glowed with happiness. He thought about their children's births, how she'd squeezed his hand through each contraction, teaching their son to throw a baseball, walking their daughter down the aisle at her own wedding. All these memories flooding back while some young officer was shouting about resisting arrest. Morrison radioed for a taser when Roland stumbled slightly. The elderly veteran's legs weren't as steady as they once were, and grief had left him weak. But Morrison saw the stumble as an attempt to resist or escape. Roland tried to explain once more about the funeral, about his wife, about just wanting to say goodbye properly. His words came out broken, interrupted by grief catching in his throat. The officers thought he was intoxicated or mentally unstable rather than understanding this was simply a man who just buried his life partner. Now here's where the story takes a turn that'll restore your faith in humanity. A small crowd had begun gathering at the cemetery gates. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Chun from the corner market recognized Roland from his daily visits to buy Margaret's favorite flowers. She started making phone calls, telling everyone what she was witnessing. One of those calls went to Tommy Rodriguez, a young Marine who lived 3 blocks away. Tommy knew Roland from the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hole, where the old soldiers sometimes shared stories with younger veterans. Tommy knew about Margaret's long battle with cancer. He knew today had been her funeral. Tommy grabbed his dress blues from the closet and started making calls of his own. Within minutes, he'd reached 6 other Marines from his unit who lived in the area. The message was crystal clear and simple. A brother was in trouble, and brothers don't abandon each other. They converged on Oakwood Cemetery, their military training, telling them to assess the situation before taking action. And what they saw made their blood run cold. Morrison, feeling his authority was being challenged in front of witnesses, made a decision that would haunt him. He used his taser on Roland, claiming the elderly veteran was becoming increasingly agitated. Roland wasn't fighting back. He wasn't doing anything except being confused and heartbroken. But Morrison felt challenged. The electric current dropped Roland to his knees beside the patrol car. His body convulsed, and the sound that escaped his throat. It wasn't quite a scream. It was the cry of a man who'd given everything to his country and his family, now being treated like he was nothing. That sound carried across the cemetery and reached the ears of 7 Marines in dress blue uniforms who had just arrived at the gates. Tommy Rodriguez felt something ignite in his chest as he watched an elderly veteran writhing on the ground while officers stood over him. This wasn't law enforcement. This was cruelty, wearing a badge. The Marines moved with precision that comes from shared training and shared values. They didn't run. They didn't shout. They didn't cause a scene. They simply walked through those cemetery gates in formation, their polished shoes clicking against the pavement in perfect rhythm. their uniforms immaculate, their bearing unmistakably military, their purpose clear to anyone who understood the brotherhood of service. Morrison looked up from where Roland lay gasping on the ground and saw 7 Marines approaching in formation. Something in their eyes made him take a step back. These weren't protesters or curious bystanders. These were active duty Marines who'd recognized one of their own being mistreated. Tommy Rodriguez approached Morrison with the kind of calm confidence that comes from real authority, not borrowed power. He asked to see Roland's identification, which revealed his military service record. Then, Tommy asked Morrison to explain exactly what crime had been committed that required tasering a 70-year-old veteran at his wife's graveside. The backup officers began to realize they might have made a catastrophic mistake. The crowd at the gates had grown larger, now including other veterans who'd heard what was happening. Cell phone cameras were recording everything. Morrison's supervisor was en route, along with the cemetery director, Tommy knelt beside the land, helping the old soldier sit up, checking for injuries from the taser. The other Marines formed a protective perimeter, not threatening the officers, but making it absolutely clear that Roland was under their protection now. The dynamic had shifted completely. Authority now belonged to those who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. Within 20 minutes, Morrison's supervisor arrived and immediately began damage control. The cemetery director confirmed that Roland had legitimate permission to be on the grounds following his wife's funeral service that morning. The trespassing charge evaporated like morning mist, along with Morrison's credibility as an officer. Roland was helped to his feet by Tommy and 2 other Marines, his dignity restored by brothers who understood what it meant to serve. The handcuffs came off, replaced by gentle hands that guided him back to Margaret's grave, where he could finally complete his farewell in peace. The Marines stood at respectful attention while Roland spoke his final words to his wife. Morrison faced an immediate internal investigation for excessive force and failure to properly assess the situation. His body camera footage would be reviewed, witness statements taken, his actions scrutinized. His career in law enforcement was effectively over before it had really begun. The other officers involved faced consequences too. Department policy was reviewed and changed to require supervisory approval before arresting anyone over 65 for minor infractions. Roland spent another hour at Margaret's grave, this time protected by Marines who understood that some things are sacred. He thanked each of them personally, his voice stronger now, his military bearing returning as he recognized the honor they'd shown him. These young warriors had reminded him that the brotherhood of service never ends, that no veteran stands alone when push comes to shove. The story spread like wildfire through social media and local news, becoming a symbol of both what can go terribly wrong when authority lacks wisdom, and what goes beautifully right when people of honor stand up for what's correct. Roland received hundreds of letters from veterans and civilians alike, all expressing respect for his service and outrage at his treatment. 3 weeks later, Roland returned to Margaret's grave carrying 7 letters of thanks, one for each Marine who'd stood with him that day. He'd written each one by hand. The way Margaret had taught him was proper for important things. In each letter, he tried to explain what their presence had meant to an old soldier who thought his days of brothers in arms were behind him. Roland understood something profound then. Margaret's final gift to him hadn't been her last words or her peaceful passing. Her gift had been showing him that honor still exists in this world, that there are still people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The Marines hadn't just protected him from injustice. They'd reminded him that the values he'd served for were still worth defending. Look, here's the truth of it all. Every veteran deserves to be treated with the dignity their service has earned. Every person deserves compassion in their moments of deepest grief. And every community needs people brave enough to stand up when those principles are threatened, whether they wear uniforms or not. That's the country worth fighting for. That's the country worth coming home to. That's what those 7 Marines in dress blues reminded us all that October morning at Oakwood Cemetery. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that honor and brotherhood still matter in this world, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that deserve to be remembered. Because these tales of courage and sacrifice, they need to be told. They need to be shared. They need to be honored. Until next time, remember, the measure of a society isn't how it treats its most powerful citizens. It's how it treats its most vulnerable. And sometimes, it takes 7 Marines in dress blues to remind everyone of that simple truth.